Hello, listeners, and welcome to part 2 of this mini-series on when therapists become abusive. I'm your speaker, Casey, and this is the last interview I will be releasing in a series of new interviews before revisiting older episodes with updates from previous guests as I move forward in the Psychology of Coercive Control course at Salford University. Here is Emma Stevens. Your relationship of somebody going to see their therapist changes drastically at that point. And I wondered if you could just talk the listeners through all of those really convoluted puzzle pieces as well that just come together to enforce this ceiling system that this woman has created.
By the time I got into her home, and I did see for a fact that she had all my stuff in her home. And at that point, my brain is struggling with what will my husband think about this? And what am I doing? But at the same time, I'm here and she's just pushing all the buttons and then starts to tell me, and I consider this part of the punishment reward system, because she lures me in with all this love bombing and I'm going to be the mother you never had. I was like a child, really. And she started saying, oh, and by the way, I don't want you to go to work today. I would like you to pick up the cleaning and, take care of the dogs and have dinner on the table. And so this started slowly increasing. That didn't all happen in one day. It was a slow progression of where it dawned on me exactly how she saw my role to be in this whole thing. And I tell in the book how my husband at the time was feeding me with information about cult-like behaviors of what a sociopath will do and what they'll tell you to do. And he would say, does this seem or feel anything like that? And I had, just little kernels would seep into my clarity and think, oh my gosh, it does sound a little like that. And so it started to shake me up enough. And I think I was pulling away from her enough where she started to get totally unhinged. Her erratic behavior became violent and emotionally dysregulated. And it got to be physical, of slamming me against walls and that kind of thing. And it was enough for me to finally have the mist clear enough, at least for that moment, to think, I need to run for my life right now. And so while she was at work, I did do that and got away from her. But just like we know in psychology, just because you leave a setting, it doesn't mean you're healed. So I took all of that with me, and I was almost in more psychic pain afterward than when I was living with her, because of all the reasons of why she had captured me. Just all those little emotional hooks she just had throughout my body. And I carried those with me, even though I did escape her home. So that took many years, really, to resolve all that. And, who knows, maybe I'm going to be resolving that for the rest of my life.
I mentioned before about parts of the book feeling almost like psychological thrillers. That moment where you go to the house to take your stuff out was so stressful. How do you progress through this next step? Have you moved back in with your husband? Do you continue to have interactions with this woman?
And that was so difficult. I don't know that I can even give a short answer to that, because it wasn't linear. It wasn't that this day I left her and then my life continued. It was so painfully slow. And I would say suicidal ideation was very much present with me, because I found myself out of the panic situation, but yet then I had to face everything that had happened. And I did end up going back to my husband. But that was really hard, because I knew it wasn't the ideal situation either. All I knew is it was a way out. And he was feeding me information that was helping me understand how people like this can try to cloud your vision and your heart and your emotions. And I still think it was the right move for me to make, because shortly after that, between my husband and another counselor and an attorney, I started to realize I had a true obligation to go to the Board of Ethics and turn her in and make a complaint. But I can't tell you how loud the voice was in my head of her saying, if you ever tell anyone, I'm just going to say it was all your fault. And don't you realize how special our relationship was? And I know you'll never do something like that. And a part that I did leave out is that throughout therapy, she did tell me all the other people she had done this to. But I was the most special because the others were, crazy, but I was her special one. But there was evidence that she used her client pool to use for her house repairs. Her former mate was also her former client. It just goes on. She was a repeat offender, let's just put it that way. So it was when I took a turn to getting well is when I decided to get a master's in psychology, because I started learning about personality disorders and tried to learn about what she said she had diagnosed me with, of bipolar or borderline personality. And, really considered that. And I was thinking that just doesn't line up. And I realized she was just throwing that at me to try to trip me up and to keep me right where she wanted me. But learning about psychology really helped so much. And then having my own children, that really kind of set me on a path of trying to get well so I could be a good mother for my children. But I tell you, it still didn't, I didn't do all of it. This happened 29 years ago. In fact, this October, it'll be 30 years. When I started getting real, true, proper, healthy therapy 6 years ago is when I really started connecting all the dots and had, really faced all the residual trauma that I hadn't faced before. All the things I went to her for in the first place, I started resolving 6 years ago.
And I think that's a really important thing to highlight with anybody listening who may be on their own journey of deconstruction and recovery, is that this is also not linear. It's not something that can happen overnight or over a week. A lot of people that have come on the show have talked about how decades after an experience, they still have moments where they'll hear a song or they'll see a clip from a movie or somebody will say a certain phrase, and all of a sudden they can be thrown back into this experience in this environment that's extremely triggering and upsetting. How they are still unpacking certain things and understanding their own triggers. And it's not something that it's not like a race that can be sprinted. It's more like a marathon that you have to tackle over time and takes continuous work, which sounds exhausting. And I imagine that it absolutely must be, but also necessary in order to understand experiences and arm yourself against any potential future exploitation that you might be faced with.
Oh, I totally agree. And that's where I would say that now that I know my patterns and who I was before 6 years ago, I was a cult hopper. I went from the indoctrination of my adoptive parents, and then I went to several other relationships that were people trying to tell me who I was. And then I married a person that was on the spectrum of being a narcissist. And then I give my life to a psychologist who basically just almost burned me alive. So there were other things that even happened after that. I didn't stop my patterns until 6 years ago. And only then can I say, have I found peace and I found a way to be comfortable in my own skin and to see how everything was all connected. There were no tangents in my life of, oh, then I ran off and did this, and then I did that crazy thing. It was all connected. So much clarity has happened. And when you get to that point of your transformation, I think it gets exciting because you do have so much more clarity, and then you become thirsty for more clarity. And so you research more and you become more dedicated and you practice who you want to become. And I think that's the the great part of where I am now is that I did have that trauma, and I know it's still with me, and it's always going to be with me, but I've learned how to manage it. And I've learned the signs of when I am in a complex PTSD moment. I know how to talk myself out of it, give myself grace. And I just am able to diffuse it a lot faster than I didn't even know what was happening before, but now I do.
These moments in your writing when your husband at the time is bringing you information on cults and coercive control, and parts of it are ringing so true with you, it almost causes an extra panic on top of what you're already experiencing, because it puts your cognitive dissonance into overdrive. You have this psychologist that is telling you one thing, and using all types of abuses to confirm in your mind the things that she is saying, but you also have your husband giving you this information that is very true, very rational, really speaks to your critical thinking and the thoughts that you're having in your own mind that you don't share with your psychologist. And it's almost like a fever pitch at one point, and it's a really tricky spot, because to understand the tactics and methods that are being used to exploit you, you have to go through that process. So I wondered if you could just talk the listeners through what that was like and how others might be able to manage that.
Yeah. Uh-huh. I was just feeling every word you were just saying, because at that time, the cognitive dissonance was like my brain and my whole body, mind and body, spirit was on fire. And it was that struggle of, knowing a little bit about the clarity, but yet to give that up of who I had built her up to be, my guru, the answer to my everything, my survival, really. It just meant I would have to completely unravel. And I think that part scared me more than to listen to the red flags. So as that progresses, it's like the balance shifts of where the red flags get so heavy. And the analogy that a lot of people use is that the shelf finally broke. There was no ability or possibility of ignoring it anymore. I have an ability, I'm pretty tenacious. And so I think in that moment that you talked about, that's so exciting in the book where I escape, is that part of me was ruling the day. It was the F you, I'm getting out of here. And my anger just powered me through that whole thing. But I would also admit that it only lasted as long as I got to my former husband's house, where I was going to live for the next 12 years. And I was crushed and started almost immediately missing her. And I think that speaks to the psychological damage that a therapist, counselor, doctor can do, even any power differential can do to someone if they've reduced you to this childlike state. And so that's what I had to fight for many years after that, is an ebb and flow of wanting her, but saying, no, she's evil. And it would just be this back and forth and back and forth. And I even took her, I filed a civil lawsuit. And that was really traumatic too, because I got re-traumatized hearing the testimony, had to see her in court. And then the mediator was very uneducated about what psychological damage can be done. And I think that speaks to a society, we need to get the court system and the judicial system to understand what it means to lose agency over your life. And that's what Janja Lalich, the cult expert, says, is that bounded choice is not a real choice. You're not coming from a place of being fully your free will of making any kind of choice at all.
The decision to take this woman to court is another very difficult moment in the book that almost feels like it's not entirely a decision that you make independently. A lot of it is encouraged by your husband at the time. Some of the things that happened to you in those rooms made me just feel so uncomfortable. There's a moment where your diaries are read, your private diaries are used by her as ammunition against you. Could you just talk the listeners through what your process was like of trying to take legal action against somebody,
Mhm.
and any recommendations you would have for people who are also thinking about maybe doing the same thing?
Yeah, I hate to paint a dim story of more trauma because I do want people to come forth. And in fact, if anyone prior to me that the psychologist had exploited had come forth, then it may not have happened to me. And when I heard things like that, it was a collective decision between myself, my husband, and the attorney and the new counselor. If it were only my decision, I don't know what I would have come up with. I don't think I was able to think my way out of a paper bag, to tell you the truth. But the more sense it made to me, and it wasn't anyone saying you must do this. I feel like it was, we all decided that with the facts that we knew, and now that we had all the information and could look back at what happened, there was no other choice for me other than to report her. Not to say it was easy, because it wasn't. It wasn't even easy with the Board of Ethics because the burden of proof was still on me. I had to substantiate what happened, and they wanted to defend their own. So it ended up that the Board of Psychology revoked her license, but the Board of Social Workers gave her a slap on the wrist and had minimal supervision where she had to be supervised while she was counseling and fully reinstated in a short amount of time. She's still practicing today at $400 an hour.
That's absolutely shocking. Do you use her real name in the book?
I do not.
Oh gosh, it would just be so good to be able to do a little Google search of my potential therapist and find out all of this. With freedom of information, if you were to do a search, there would be court records of
Yes,
your potential therapist if they had been involved in something like that, which is always something I recommend people doing. I mean,
absolutely.
just a simple Google search, you never know what's going to come up, even if it's like some yoga group that you're thinking of joining or some
Yes,
holiday retreat you're thinking of going on. A good Google can kind of swerve you in the direction of that place or the opposite direction. But when you talk about your transformation, there's a few moments throughout this legal process where you get some of your fire back for yourself, and you get some of the power back for yourself.
yes, there were both. I mean, there's one where I say where it was so difficult to see her, hear her voice. And something I've left out is all the methods she would use of, I think therapists study this, or at least the ones that want to use it as a method to lure people into mind reform. The way she dressed, the way she talked, the way she hesitated a little too long, the penetrating stare, the look over her glasses. There were a lot of things that were techniques used, and she was doing all of that again in the courtroom, and I was right in front of her. So that was so difficult to be in. I could feel her energy. But at the same time, I was carrying a secret literally within me that I found out I was pregnant with my second child. And I had found out that very morning that I was on the stand. And it really, once I was getting pounded by the defense attorney, actually, let's call it malpractice attorney, because he was protecting the money that they were going to have to give. Um, I was feeling all of his harshness and all of his criticism, but at the same time, I did get in touch with, I'm pregnant and I love my little girl that I've already had. And I'm having another baby, and it really helped fuel me to make through that very difficult situation.
When you become attached to the hero of the story, these small wins have a much bigger impact than they would have in other types of writing, I think. And that's what's really powerful about the art of memoir writing. And this was a really special one, as I said, for the reasons at the start. So many people have reached out to talk about exploitative therapists and counselors. After the resolution of the legal proceedings, where do you go from there as an individual?
We had moved away from Laguna Beach by that time. And in fact, she left her home and went to another area. So there was no relationship left at that point at all, which was a good thing. And then my whole life shifted towards finishing my master's and also raising my two little babies. But yet really what I did is compartmentalized everything that happened. The going to psychology courses really helped me, but in a large part, I did compartmentalize and didn't really bring that box back open until my children were grown, because then I had the time to really deal with it and think about it. Because I think I carried that shame all along, thinking I must have done it. I must have been the person that she says I am. So I wasn't willing, or my psyche wasn't ready yet to open that box until there was sort of a catalyst where I opened a lot of boxes in my life. And that was just one of them.
That is the end of part 2 in this mini-series on when therapists become abusive. To get in touch with Emma Stevens, or to find her memoir A Fire Is Coming, you can follow the links in the episode description. And to get in touch with me, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com, or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, host of the Cult Vault podcast.